last week, Mr. President, naguluntang ang buong bayan ang palabasin sa periodiko na papalabasin na si Antonio Sanchez. Now, Mr. President, this man, Sanchez, was convicted of nine counts of life imprisonment. Seven counts, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, not only, sinabi ko 9 counts because there were 2 counts also of murder, Mr. President, against Nelson and Rickson Peñalosa, Mr. President. So, 9 counts of conviction ng life imprisonment, reclusion perpetua, Mr. President. Now, all of a sudden, because of a new law, I guess it slipped through the cracks, and this is where I argue for a budget for communication, effective communication. Because if the people don't know, we will all be hoodwinked. Madadaya tayo. Magkakaroon ng capricious, abusive conduct, Mr. President, itong mga taong nandito. Mr. President, can you please park the 2 gentlemen? They're behaving in a very, they're both, I know they love one another, but they don't have to embrace each other in front of me, Mr. President. I'm scandalized. Yes, I don't know why. I don't know why a lot of senators are attracted to Senator Gatchalian. Is it because siya ay anak ng mayaman?
No, because he's single.
Siya na yun ang mayaman. Okay. Having set aside. Having set aside this distraction, Mr. President, let me try and get back to my point, Mr. President. My point, Mr. President, is simply this. Kung bigla na lang tayo magugulantang at papalabasin ang isang preso na dapat talaga mabulok na dapat siya sa kasamaan na kanyang ginawa, Mr. President, kailangan pigilan natin yan, Mr. President. Because yung batas na ginawa ay tila may pagkukulang. Pero bago ako umabot doon, sasabihin ko muna po, bakit po capricious? Sasabihin may good conduct. Unang-una, in the same law, they were supposed to make and implementing rules and regulations na dapat meron silang computerized records. Up to now, Mr. President, there is no computerized records. Pagka-computerized ang record, Mr. President, malalaman na natin kung ilang taon na nagsisilbi yung taong yon at kung ano ang conduct na ginagawa niya sa preso, Mr. President. Now, if we do that, Mr. President, hindi tayo malulusutan na very capricious. Lalo na, hindi ko naman sinasabi lahat ng superintendent ng Muntinlupa. Mr. President, these people are always in the Muntinlupa prison and they interact with the prisoners. And even a lot of our jailers there have interacted to the point that they were enriching themselves by providing allowance of an operation of a franchise to hold a cell phone. Mr. President, I'm being facetious. Nagagamit nila yan. Or for that matter, binibigyan ng allowance at TV, katulad nung kay Mayor Sanchez, may TV, flat iron TV, may air condition. Now, Mr. President, it really is a joke. You know, we keep talking about us as the representatives of the law here, but it is awful to allow this situation to continue. Did you have a comment, Mr. President?
Yes, I could not help but laugh because you said flat iron. You mean flat screen?
A flat screen, Mr. President. I'm sorry, Mr. President. I'm glad that you and I agree because we're both abiding husbands, Mr. President. We're used to flat irons, Mr. President. After the laundry, we have to use a flat iron. Thank you very much. We have to put in a little humor once in a while, and I'm glad that you did that, Mr. President, because I get overwhelmed by this emotional, that really challenges the emotion on how we as lawyers or we as lawmakers here are challenged by the fact that the intention of the law is totally set aside by the selfish, by the greedy, and by the corrupt, Mr. President. Can you imagine the injustice done to the family of Eileen Sarmenta and Young Gomez, Mr. President? Aba, imagine, Senator Severi was very upset. A lot of us were very upset. I saw the Facebook accounts. Mr. President, let us look at the family. My God, this is a monster that perpetrated its evil deed and was having a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde mentality. I cannot forget him when he was being brought before the sentencing and he was having a rosary he must have read 3 or 4 rosary. I'm just exaggerating. And he was talking about Mama Mary. But when he was convicted, he said expletives on the way out. You know, the PI word. How can you say that this guy can be rehabilitated? Now, Mr. President, I am not one who's saying that we should not give a second chance. I believe in that. But that has got to be proven beyond any doubt, Mr. President, to assuage and alleviate the suffering of the people whose families they snuffed happiness out of, Mr. President. And therefore, they should not be allowed to do so because the people are owed justice, Mr. President. And if they get away with this, kundi naging vigilant ang mga tao, kundi umalma lahat tayo mga senador dyan at mga tao, abay baka nakalusot. And I'm glad the President took action, Mr. President, because it clarifies that we are a government of laws and not of men, that justice must be done, though the heavens fall, Mr. President.
So in the case, if we are overly technical, Mr. President, in the case of Sanchez, if he did that violation of, terrible violation of placing drugs inside the statue of the Virgin Mary, he would only forfeit for that said month. For me, that is totally absurd. That is interpreting the law totally against the spirit of the Constitution, totally against the spirit of our philosophy on penal laws, Mr. President. So I think that is something that the good committee led by our very dynamic and eloquent chair should look into, Mr. President, because if we interpret these rules technically, he could commit all kinds of crimes. He could even kill somebody in prison, and he would only lose his good conduct allowances for the month. So I think we should have some qualifiers, if not in the law, then perhaps in the implementing rules, Mr. President. Just for the record, and again, I reiterate my support for the good gentleman, Mr. President.
There is another interpretation on that particular point, which is after your violation, you start fresh.
That's right.
That makes more sense to me, Mr. President.
You start fresh.
That makes more sense. But perhaps that should be enshrined to prevent any absurd interpretation.
Correct.
That is the purpose of laws, that is the purpose of rules, that is the purpose of institutions. As a great man once said, the life of the law is experience. It's not logic, Mr. President. So experience shows that a recidivist will tend to commit repeat violations. So someone who has been convicted of 7 life sentences certainly does not deserve to lose his good conduct allowances just for 1 month. He deserves to lose it. He deserves to start from 0 or even from negative, Mr. President.
Correct.
Mr. President, I have a personal attachment to this case. I was the one who prosecuted and had Sanchez convicted and sentenced to 7 life terms. The theory being that there were 7 of them in conspiracy, and the act of one is the act of all, and the penalty of one should be suffered by the rest of the 7, of the 6. And that is how the 7 life sentences came about, because there were 7 of them. So that is why he was sentenced to 7 life terms. However, the revised penal code provides that a penalty cannot exceed 40 years. Having said that, Mr. President, I can see the validity of the position taken by Senator Angara, of Senator Gordon. I just stand up in order to put a caution on the record, because an amendment to the law which will make clear that Mr. Sanchez and his cohorts cannot avail of the good conduct time allowance,
Unequal protection.
an amendment. If Senator Angara can listen a bit, because this is his theory. An amendment which will say that those who are guilty of heinous offenses may not avail of the good conduct time allowance may imply, and I underscore may imply that today he is entitled to it. Because you're amending it in order to make clear that those who are guilty of heinous crimes are not included in the bill, in the law. And if you do that, Mr. Sanchez can claim that that cannot apply to him because it will have the nature of an ex post facto legislation. So ako po, sinasabi ko lang, ingat tayo. Let us study it carefully. We should not go into this blindsided by our sympathies for the families of Sarmiento and Gomez. Indeed, they deserve the sympathy. As I said, I myself should be the first to have that sympathy on record because I personally prosecuted this guy. I see evil in his face, whether or not you have the death penalty. If you examine it closely, yung anghel lang po na nakaupo dyan sa tabi, ang hindi po pwedeng magkamali. So, paano po, how did Sanchez become entitled to this good conduct time allowance? If you are to believe the Bureau of Correction spokesman, he said Sanchez has already served an equivalent of 49 years. 49 years. And he was finally convicted only, I think, in 1998 or 1999. Barely 19 years. Huh?
1995. The case was 1993.
No, he was convicted in the RTC.
Convicted.
In the RTC.
Yes.
He was finally convicted by the Supreme Court in
1999. All right.
Or
Correct.
barely 20 years ago. How did it happen that he was credited with 48 years? You will say he has not violated the appropriate rules. Kung titingnan mo lang po yung dyaryo Ginoong Pangulo, you saw Mayor Sanchez in with wristwatch, shades, balat ang sapatos, maganda ang suot. Under that manual cited by Senator Angara, non-wearing of prison uniform is a violation. Now, so how did it happen that he was getting all of these credits when the enumeration of 45 instances when you will be deprived of the benefit would prevent him from from earning this time allowance benefit? He was found to have violated the rules on the Comprehensive Drug Act. He was twice. And under, again, that manual of the OJ, it says violation of the law or an ordinance.
We can clarify then that his fresh start, his day one for good conduct was after the picture was taken with him with sunglasses.
Yes, Mr.
Di ba? Oh.
Or actually, no, in conversation here last week, that there were several kidnap for ransom convicts that are applying for this particular GCTA, Good Conduct and Time Allowance. Mr. President, imagine the families that testified against these people. Na ito mga balasubas will be allowed to go out again and be possibly a threat to these families. Nakakala nila nakakamit na silang hustisya, that they are going to be there for life. And this is not just on kidnap for ransom, many other instances of drug trafficking to other heinous crimes, Mr. President. And that is why a review needs to take place. We need to review the law, and I support the move of Senator Gordon. Maybe, for example, there's a provision in the law. And I'm not a lawyer, Mr. President. I do not pretend to be one, although sometimes we call ourselves murag abogado. Murag abogado in Visayas, parang abogado. Mr. President, but for everybody else, because if that happens, Mr. President, my worry is nobody will testify. Nobody will risk their life, knowing fully well that those guys will pretend and feign to be good people for the next 10 years, which has happened in the United States, by the way, Mr. President, and come out of jail, and their lives, they will just go on a hunting spree and look for these people and terminate their lives and go back to a criminal spree or go on a criminal rampage, Mr. President. This is actually the same problem in the United States, where in the criminal justice, the justice system and the penal system of the United States are now having problems because many of these gunmen, these psychotic gunmen, rapists, sexual offenders, were actually pardoned or paroled, Mr. President.
Paroled, yeah.
Paroled is the word. And they move state. They just move from California to Utah or California to Texas, and then they commit the crime again, and it's found out that this fellow had convictions in several states and paroled.
Yes, I've read about that
Yes,
also.
Mr. President. So that is one thing that I think we should look into, and I'm happy that we have legal luminaries, Mr. President.
That's the problem with the term that some are saying about second chances. We're going to give them a second chance to commit the same crime again.
Correct, Mr. President.
It could be the other way around, right? So,
Yes.
and then, so I have a better suggestion. But of course, this is just a mere suggestion. We will let the committee do what its work. But my suggestion is repeal the law.
Yes,
Give
Mr.
it back to the president, presidential pardon.
And the
That's it.
parole, yes, Mr. President.
Repeal
To the
law.
old system.
Yes.
Yes, Mr.